You definitely have to stop making excuses for the people that have hurt you. And I feel like even in my own life, I've done this. And I feel like a lot of people have done this, but they aren't fully aware that they've already done it. It's something that they've done on such a small, minute level that it's even hard to acknowledge and understand that what they did isn't something that's going to, help you or benefit you at all, especially when you are trying to move on and understand, why someone did something. And I think a lot of times when we are trying to move on, you can kind of forget that, blaming yourself isn't something that you can keep doing. And I think what I mean by that is, when you're getting hurt, a lot of people immediately look internally and they ask, what they could have done or why this person did that. You have to understand that when people do these things, it's not a reflection of your effort, but theirs. It's not something that you can prevent all the time. And it's definitely, something that's going to happen time and time again. When people hurt you, it's not a reflection of your own effort, but it's a reflection of theirs. How they're able to see you and value you is something entirely up to them. This is something that we can't control. And when people use that and take us for granted, it's not a reflection on ourselves to say that we could have or should have done something differently. It says everything about how they view the relationship. It's not something we can keep holding on to or trying to fix or saying that, we should have acted a certain way. A lot of times we can kind of, push ourselves down in the sense, we kind of forget our own self-respect and feel like we should have done more for this person when really that means we should have done less. This person being so easy to hurt you or use you says everything about how they see you. In the end, you do realize those people that said they don't deserve you, actually don't. They don't actually deserve you. They didn't even acknowledge the level of effort that you were pouring into them. And I think you have to learn to accept that. You have to understand that your effort wasn't necessarily a waste, but them trying to acknowledge it and them, being this person in your head that you tried to get them to be isn't something real. It's not something tangible that you can actually hold on to and build a future out of. And I think when you are thinking about a future with someone, I've even spoken on, romanticizing the potential in other people. And I think this is so easy to do and so easy to get lost in because you want someone to be something. You want them to be this person. If you're in your mindset, it's like, oh, when this person heals or when this person learns how to actually have a relationship, they'll be so much better. And I think the longer you wait for that, the easier it's going to get for that person to disappoint you. And I think when we are talking to people, a lot of times we feel like we should have, these high expectations when really it's a lot easier to set them low. Not in the sense that everything's negative or horrible, but in a sense that you won't be disappointed. When you have low expectations talking to people, it only makes sense because people aren't actually, giving you what you want or what you need in that relationship. And I think when we are doing this, time and time again, it's easy to look at our past and kind of compare that. And I think it can be helpful, at times to compare and understand, what mistakes you made in the past, but also sometimes it's unfair. You can't compare someone new to the people in your past. And I think when you keep doing that, it's going to be so much easier to see them under a certain light, to see them under that microscope of things. And I think when you do compare them like that, you have to kind of like wash that slate clean. You have to completely, erase what has happened in your past. And I think if you're still comparing it, you're not truly gotten over that thing. You're not truly healed from what has already happened to you. And when I'm saying this, and making excuses for people that have already hurt you, it's not something that we can, just wait and hope that people will, actually start to view us or understand our own thinking. But no, it's learning how to move on from the past. And you have to move on from the past in order to stop making these excuses, especially the people that have hurt you in the past, and I think that's something that a lot of people keep doing because they're so, lost with how they feel, and what they want out of said relationships, and I think moving on from that is honestly something that a lot of people can get stuck in. They get stuck in that mindset. And I think that comparison is really hard to break out of in a sense, and I think even with yourself, you do kind of, on a subliminal level, view these people the same way as past, especially if you've had someone who's damaged you or hurt you really to the core. That is now someone that you are going to think about a lot. And we can think about the people that have hurt us so much more than people that have been good to us. And I think it's just because that feeling, that emotion can feel so much stronger and it's so much easier to tap into. And I think so many people kind of get lost in that. It's kind of lost in that translation of how you really feel and then just falling into this pit of sadness. And when I am speaking on, the past and having new people, it's definitely important that these new people aren't compared to the old people. You kind of can't keep doing this to yourself time and time again. you can't compare new people to the ones from your past. You know, those people that have hurt you, in order to compare those two and look at them through the same microscope, it's unfair. You know, it's unfair to compare and to feel like this person might be doing the same things that someone in the past has, because now you're setting that as a standard. You know, you're understanding that what happens with this person, you know, you're taking away from their own character and who they are now, and you're still using the things that have happened in your past to control your future. You know, and I think when you are constantly doing this and you kind of, even on a subconscious level, do it, it kind of shows that you haven't truly healed from what has already happened in your past. You know, if you're still stuck on the things that have happened or how someone did something, and you use that to compare and kind of set this standard for what you allow and don't allow in the future, it can hurt you. You know, you have to realize that everyone is different. Everyone is going to view and experience these things differently. And you kind of can't compare the two all the time. You kind of can't hold them to the same standard, because sometimes you might be doing yourself a disservice. You know, you might be hurting yourself more than you think by complaining or over analyzing certain situations with someone, because they are not the same person that hurt you in your past. You know, that is something I think people keep doing, you know, on such a small level. And even when we are talking about, you know, healing, and you do talk to new people, some people are saying they're, you know, they're tired of the talking stage, or talking to people and feeling a certain way about it, or not feeling anything at all. And I think if you tell yourself you're not gonna, you know, move on or feel anything, you know, with people, that's ultimately what's gonna happen. You know, if you feel like you're gonna feel nothing, you're gonna feel nothing. And I think a lot of times when we are talking about having, you know, relationships and connections with people, people can be so easy to dismiss them or to value them, you know, so much less, because truthfully, they're not over their past. They're not over those things that have happened to them, and they can't even admit that. And I think the biggest part about healing is admitting that you're still hurt. You know, being aware enough to know that what has happened in your past is something that's still going to, you know, damage you and hurt you. And I think so many people are scared to accept that part of things. You know, that damage is so real, and so hard to actually understand and get over, but it's something that we have to do. You know, and I'm making excuses for people, and the biggest part of this is those people that have hurt us, you know, using their life as a reason to why they hurt us is something that's definitely the most detrimental. You know, you have to realize that just because this person has a horrible ex, or some past trauma, this doesn't now make it okay to hurt you, to make it okay to act a certain way, or to act out of character, or whatever that thing may be. You know, if that person isn't mature enough to break out of that, to heal from that thing, and to, you know, be with you correctly and healthy, that's on them. And this isn't on you to say that you have to, you know, break them out of that, or that if people can't heal, then you shouldn't be around them. No, you shouldn't be going out of your way to heal other people. That is what it means. You know, when we are spoken on, you know, the damaged and wounded healer, I think a lot of times you have to realize that sometimes you can be doing that on such a small level that you don't even realize it. When people are telling you they're not over this thing, or they're clearly showing that they have, you know, these trust issues that are still bad, or these communication skills that are horrible because they haven't had something like in the past, or in the past when they did try, it hurt them a lot, that shows they're not ready. That shows this isn't something that you should be, you know, pouring so much into and setting such a high expectation. You know, once you have these high expectations for people, it's going to be so much easier for you to get hurt. And I think a lot of times when you do realize, you know, that level of hurt that you are now enduring and trying to get over, is something that's going to make making excuses so much easier. You know, you're going to be able to make so much more excuses, even for yourself, why you treat people a certain way, because you're not over that thing. And it's all about not being healed correctly. You know, healing is something that we actually have to pour so much more time and effort than we truly think we do. And I think a lot of people forget that. You know, time can heal, but we have to actively use that time to heal ourselves. You know, if you're just going to forget that thing and let time pass and kind of distract yourself time and time again, those same wounds are just going to keep opening every time you try to make a connection with someone. You know, it's going to be forever hard to find something real and to find like you're actually comfortable, because you've never actually healed those things. You know, if you got a big scar and you're using, you know, a band-aid just to cover instead of letting it heal, you know, and taking the time to get stitches and to do all these things, it's never going to heal correctly. It's still going to be something that's so easy to be reopened by other people and to get hurt again, because we don't know what we're doing. you know. And when time passes, we have to actively use that time to heal ourselves, you know, to pour into ourselves. And that means that same love that we're trying to give to other people or want to, we have to start giving to ourselves again. And that is the biggest part of healing. You know, you're not just letting time pass. You're not just using this excuse that, you know, in a few months or a few years from now, I'll feel okay because I'll forget about this thing. It's I've understood this thing and I've accepted it. And now I can be this new person. You know, now I can live in this certain light, you know, and that is the biggest thing that you have to do. You know, you're never going to be able to heal if you're stuck in that mindset or stuck in this feeling like people aren't actually going to be there for you or going to help you. And I think the biggest part about that is understanding that that disappointment can happen so much more. You know, that disappointment is really what stops us and really makes us honestly start making excuses for people. You know, just because we can't deal with what this person has done to us, we make excuses for them because we don't want to. You know, we don't want to accept that this person that hurt us. You know, we don't want to accept that this person, you know, did something so bad. And really, we have to live with that. We have to understand that, you know, that is acceptance maxing. It's not depressing, it's not dwelling on it, it's accepting it. And that's something that so many people are not only scared to do but don't know how to do. And when you have these high expectations, accepting things is going to be, you know, only so much harder to do, you know. When you set these high expectations when you're talking to people, it gets so much easier to be disappointed. You know, that is like hurting yourself and expecting someone to act like you. You know, you have to stop expecting yourself from other people. You know, just because you are so genuine and easy when it comes to giving that love doesn't mean everyone is. You know, doesn't mean everyone is going to be able to pour that level of effort and to understand, you know, the emotions and the communication and everything that goes into it. You know, when you are that open minded, you have to understand that it's not as common as you think. You know, a lot of that common sense and stuff can really go out the window when you are trying to form these connections. And when you set this high expectation and believe this person to be someone who they say they are or who you want them to be instead of who they are in reality, it's going to be so much easier to get hurt. You know, that is just setting yourself up for heartbreak in the end. You know, there is no experience to gain, there is no thing that actually comes about from it. You're just hoping this person acts a certain way or is a certain way when in reality they're not. You know, that is going to be so much easier when you are getting hurt. You can't make excuses for them. You can't try to, you know, get over those things. You're just going to be hurting yourself time and time again. And that's something we have to learn to break out of. We have to break out of that mindset and understand that making excuses for them won't make that pain any less. It won't make us hurt any less. It won't make us feel any less about the situation. That pain is something that we have to live with. And the more we make excuses for people, the harder it's going to be to accept it.